The NFL draft is extremely unpredictable. Why is that the case, and what it could mean for the New Orleans Saints? We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Wednesday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at BlueNile.com. Mother's Day is right around the corner. So on this Mother's Day, give mom something that she'll treasure forever by checking out the fine jewelry that's available over at BlueNile.com. Locked On Sports listeners will get $50 off of $500 purchases. Just use promo code Locked On at checkout. The NFL draft is extremely complicated to predict, and anyone that tells you otherwise, they're lying to you, right? No one knows the way that the NFL draft is going to shake out, not even the teams that are a part of it. Remember, teams are doing their own mock drafts as well with the information that they're getting around other teams and about other teams to sort of figure out how the board might shake out in their case. I want to explore why it is that the NFL draft is so unpredictable. And to be completely honest, the idea is simple here, right? The kernel, the takeaway, very simple. Every team has multiple scouts, right? And every team goes about building their big board, building their draft boards very differently. And every one of those scouts has a different piece of input that they give as well. So this just simply means that if you asked 32 NFL teams how they believe that the first round is going to shake out, you're going to get 32 completely different answers because everyone's big board is different. In yesterday's episode, we talked about some potential surprise first round picks, including some that the Saints could even potentially make at 19, or if they shock the world and trade back, which they haven't done since 2007. One of the reasons why we talked about those surprise first round selections is because of the lack of first round grades that are being given to this draft class. This could be one of those draft classes that's not really that top heavy, but could be productive rounds 1 through 4, rounds 1 through 5, right? And so because of that, you're going to see a ton of different ways that this board could shake out. And I know that we build a habit a little bit over time by doing these mock draft simulators and things like that and say, well, this player won't be there at that place, or this player won't be there at that place. And some of that is because we're reading mock drafts and there's a little bit of predictability to that, specifically media mock drafts that are all kind of the same, right? Like the same principles are built off. There's the same sort of top 15 group. There's the same sort of bottom 15 group in the first round. And every now and then you might see some disagreement about what player is going to go at certain spots. But for the most part, first round players, there's like a media consensus. There's not the same consensus in the NFL because media and the NFL scouts and coaches look at very different things. Coaches, for instance, love traits. Not a lot of media people build their mock drafts based off of traits. They build them off of trends and tendencies. That's what I do. And so I think that when you look at where it is that we have these conversations around, oh, that player won't be there at this place, that player won't be there in this round, it's because you've done a bunch of draft network mock draft simulators, and that always happens. The deal is that the real deal here is that the NFL draft happens once, one time. So all those reps that it took for, in any individual to build an expectation of who's going to be available when, none of that applies, right? The NFL draft happens one time over the course of 3 days, 7 rounds, and then that's it. There's no building habits. There's no expectation of this player is going to be available at this place or in this round. None of that happens in the NFL draft. Plus, you have the Seattle Seahawks picking in the top 10, who are always a wild card this year. So when you look at anybody that's sitting there and that's going to tell you this is what's absolutely going to happen in the draft, they might get my friend Tony Wiggins over at the Locked On Jags podcast, for instance, has been doing this for decades. And he got the most that he's ever gotten right out of 32 first round selections is 8. He talked about it on a recent episode of Locked On Jags. Like, that's the reality here. What we're looking at as media people, very, very different than what the teams are looking at amongst themselves. And I can only tell you what I think the New Orleans Saints are looking at. I can't really delve in and tell you what the Houston Texans are looking at, or what the Jacksonville Jaguars are looking at, or what the Minnesota Vikings are looking at, right? Like, I cover a team and I focus on a team. Now, I cover the entire NFL for the network as well, but not to the same type of familiarity that I cover the Saints. So I can sit here and talk to you all day about trends and tendencies and all the things that New Orleans Saints want to do. But how are those trends and tendencies impacted by the trends and tendencies of other teams? I might not have that same level of intricate knowledge, especially with a team like, let's say, Minnesota, where there's a whole new regime and we don't know. No one knows what the trends and tendencies are in that case, right? So that's one of the reasons why, many reasons why the NFL draft is so unpredictable. All 32 teams looking at it differently. All 32 teams have different grades on different players. All 32 teams are undecided, or non-universal, let's say it that way, in terms of who's a first round grade, who's not a first round grade, all of that. So because of that, the NFL draft will continue to be unpredictable, and they'll get one swing at it starting tomorrow on Thursday, as the first round will be that evening. We want to get started with our own first round, though. We're going to get started with our own 2 mock drafts here. I went to the PFF simulator, and sticking with today's theme, I turned randomness all the way up. So some crazy things happen for the draft, but I tried to keep the picks that I made as realistic as possible. But players flying off in places that you don't expect them to, all of that made it a lot more fun and gives you a little bit of a sense of how things could potentially go, right? So we're going to talk about the realistic selections that I was able to make for the New Orleans Saints based off of the highest randomness. And there were a pair of big wins for the Saints, including investing in a quarterback in round 1. But I'll explain to you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at BlueNile.com. Mother's Day right around the corner. You got the NFL draft wrapping up this weekend, the following weekend, Mother's Day. So make sure you get mom something that she's going to treasure forever by heading over to BlueNile.com. And so whether you're customizing, a ring, maybe you're looking for some diamond-studded necklaces, maybe some gemstone earrings, anything like that, you're going to find all of it over at BlueNile.com. And if it's not perfect, no problem, because they have a 100% satisfaction guarantee so that you can shop stress-free with guaranteed shipping on all returns. So head over to BlueNile.com today, and for our Locked On Sports listeners, you're going to get $50 off of $500. And this is a podcast exclusive that's only good until Mother's Day. Use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. That's promo code LOCKEDON. Plus, every order is insured, it ships free, and it arrives in discreet packaging so that it doesn't give away what's inside. So again, shop stress-free and find your forever piece over at BlueNile.com today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we have all of that NFL draft coverage starting for you tomorrow, Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time, live over at the Locked On NFL YouTube page. We'll also premiere an episode here on Locked On Saints. It'll be our final draft preview from 7 to 7:30 Eastern time to get you ready for the draft. You can come over, you can watch that, then you can flood over to the pre-show before the NFL draft kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Central. So we'll have all that live coverage, all the local experts giving you all the breakdowns on every selection, the people that actually cover the teams talking about the selections that are being made. So it's going to be a ton of fun. Make sure you go and check that out again over at the Locked On NFL YouTube page, and go and check out the Ultimate Mock Draft 2022 as well, wherever you get your podcast as well. So I want to talk now about turning up randomness all the way up on Pro Football Focus and what it means for the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, like, the big takeaway here is that the New Orleans Saints are in a great position at 16 and 19 to walk away with quality players, kind of no matter what happens in front of them. For instance, the first one of these that I did, all 4 top tackles went off the board. That's Trevor Penning, who would probably be the most realistic for the Saints at 16, as well as Charles Cross, Ike Mekonwu, as well as Evan Neal out of Alabama. And not only that, but they also had 3 of the top 4 wide receivers go off the board before them as well, and Jameson Williams, Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State, and then Drake London out of USC. So at 16, I just went ahead and went wide receiver right away because I wasn't about to lose out on getting Chris Olave. So I went with Chris Olave out of Ohio State at 16, and that was a really easy selection for me, right? I know that all those top 4 tackles were off the board, but with a wide receiver still there, I went ahead and jumped at wide receiver to wait and see what fell to me at 19. And at 19, I went outside of my usual comfort zone here because defensive tackles were off the board, Jordan Davis as well as Devontae Wyatt. Top safeties were off the board, like Kyle Hamilton. So I went with a quarterback, and I usually don't go quarterback in these mock drafts. But at 19, with no top safety, no interior defensive lineman, no top tackle, no top wide receiver to double up on, it was easy for me to just go with a quarterback, especially with Malik Willis still being on the board. Now, remember, this is high up there in terms of randomness and all that, but let's not dismiss the idea that Malik Willis could fall. We watched Lamar Jackson go from being one of the top 2 quarterbacks a few years ago to being selected at 32 only because the Baltimore Ravens traded back into the first round to make it happen. So I took Malik Willis at 19. Again, I don't think that taking a quarterback is necessary here. I trust that Jameis Winston is going to have a nice year in 2022, hopefully in 2023 as well. I'm not really like trying to start up a campaign to replace Jameis. I do know that Jameis is in a tough situation because Jameis can't just be good, right? He has to be better than good in order for people to kind of, really admit that he's a good quarterback, which is a whole thing. But Malik Willis is somebody that makes a ton of sense if he's there at 19 and you don't have to give up any additional assets to get him. Go ahead, grab him because he's the best quarterback in this class. He's the only one, in my opinion, that's deserving of a first round pick in this class. And he gives you the mobility, right? You saw that really uncomfortable pursuit of Deshaun Watson over the course of this season or the course of this offseason. It's clear that the New Orleans Saints wouldn't have a problem with shifting to a more mobile passer. Malik Willis would give you that, but also give you like none of the off-field business that came with Deshaun Watson. So it was easy for me here to take Malik Willis at 19, although I'm not trying to start up a, replace Jameis type of situation here. At 49, Jordan Davis fell. I was thinking about not taking him because, again, like randomness is all the way up. It's kind of crazy. But Jordan Davis is one of those guys that really could fall. I don't know if he's going to fall all the way to the second round, don't get me wrong, but he could fall because what's his biggest value? A good combine, right? Other than that, he's a nose tackle that played somewhere around 24 snaps in the biggest game of his season and wasn't on the field 3 downs for throughout his time at Georgia. But here's what I won't do, though. I'm not going to excuse, I'm not going to downplay Jordan Davis by saying that the rest of the Georgia defense was good, because where does that stop, right? At what point do you stop saying that, right? Do you stop saying that when you talk about Devontae Wyatt, or do you stop saying that when you talk about Nakobe Dean or Quay Walker? Like, at what point are all of them not good because they're only good because the other players are good? But if they're good because the other players are good, then that means the other players are good. It's a whole thing. So it's just a cycle that's kind of dumb. And so I won't make that argument. But, for Jordan Davis, there could be a lack of value seen in his position, especially with him basically being a nose tackle at the next level. Okay, next up, at pick 98, I was able to go with Zach Tom, the tackle out of Wake Forest. Haven't talked about him much, but he's a big prospect who has some nice athleticism. He is mean. He's a mauler, road grader, whatever cliche you want to come up with. And he can pretty much play all 5 of the positions along the offensive line. Played most of his time at left tackle, but also played at center for Wake Forest. And again, has experience across the entire line. So Zach Tom, getting him at 98, felt realistic and also felt like a really good selection as well. Then I had Kirby Joseph, the safety out of Illinois, fall into the 4th round at 120. That was an easy one to take too. And really, like, that might not be Kirby Joseph, but that could be one of these other safeties that ends up being available around that time, like a JT Woods or something like that. Just somebody that's going to be able to help force turnovers, right? And so help create, be a playmaker. Marquise Bell as well. Like, any of those 3 safeties at this spot, if the Saints don't get a safety earlier on in the draft, which I'm going to do a safety earlier in the next mock draft here in just a moment, then that would be a really good space to just take a swing at somebody that's going to be able to go out there and make some plays every now and then. And Kirby Joseph is the best ball hawk in this draft. At pick 161, I was able to go running back. I went with James Cook in this case, but again, replace whichever running back feels more realistic, although James Cook falling isn't unrealistic considering the positional value or lack thereof at running back, and considering his lack of tape too. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of carries. He averaged like 57 carries a year at Georgia. He had a really nice year last year and I think came onto the spot there, but he's a really easy one. I mean, you could target this guy downfield. He's got good ball tracking ability, looking in passes over his shoulders like Alvin Kamara does, like a wide receiver does. So I just really like what you would get with James Cook, who can also be a good pass blocker and somebody that can run in between the tackles and around the outside as well. So him, Rachaad White, all these guys would be great fits for the New Orleans Saints. And he hits the threshold, which is really nice as well. And then finally, at 194, I had Phi Mathis still on the board. The usual mantra is that if you can get what's my usual mantra here? If you can get an Alabama defensive tackle in the 3rd round, you draft an Alabama defensive tackle in the 3rd round. In this case, it was if you can draft an Alabama defensive tackle in the 6th round, then draft an Alabama defensive tackle in the 6th round. This could have been any real like athlete player here. I thought about maybe doubling up at wide receiver. Calvin Austin was still on the board. Khalil Shakir. I always want to replace him with Tupac's last name. Khalil Shakir was also on the board. Could have gone with him just to get another slot presence there, but I had Chris Olave, and so I was pretty happy with that. So that's our first like super random wacky Wednesday mock draft, right? Take that for what you will. Again, these aren't predictions. These are just another way to talk about some additional prospects, but it is an example of how crazy things can get when things don't go the way that you expect in the NFL draft, which is exactly what happened in this next mock draft, where I was able to get my number 1 tackle and one of the top receivers. So we're going to break that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, it's my great pleasure to be able to tell you about our friends, as always, over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. Trust me, I've tried a bunch of different protein bars, and Built Bar is really the only one that I like, if I'm being completely honest with you. Covered in 100% chocolate, fantastic flavors. Mint brownie, you all know, is my favorite. There's also peanut butter brownie, cherry barcia, bunch of great stuff that you can go and check out, and a bunch of other products too. Like Built.com has a ton of other stuff that is well worth your time to go and take a look at, including, of course, the Built Puffs that are fantastic, protein-infused marshmallow. Built Bar, I don't know how it is that they do it, but they do it. They focus on getting the flavor right first and then making it healthy, and it absolutely shows. So if you want to go and check them out for yourself, head over to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off over at Built.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints, going through PFF Mock Draft Simulator with the highest randomness. And the point here is just to talk about the unpredictability of the NFL draft. This isn't really predicting the NFL draft at this point. We're going to do that tomorrow and predict what I think the Saints are going to do. And then in our pre-draft episode that'll air at 7 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Central time, on which will premiere on the Locked On Saints YouTube page. That one's going to be more about like what I would do in the draft, if that makes sense. So I have some special things saved up for that. So a ton for us to be able to get into here over the next few days. And in tomorrow's episode, we're also going to talk about Mickey Loomis's presser, what he had to say about the NFL draft, all of that too. In the meanwhile, while you're waiting for those episodes, make sure you're checking out Locked On Pelicans. Jake Madison. Pelicans lost Game 5, but back home for Game 6. Going to be a lot of fun. So go and check him out, who's doing a phenomenal job covering the surging New Orleans Pelicans. All right, so again, we're getting into unpredictability in the NFL draft. No one really knows what the NFL draft is going to fall like, what it's going to be like, anything like that. So let's take advantage of it. So we turned randomness all the way up on the PFF Mock Draft Simulator. And then we got away with an absolute steal here in this draft. And one that I don't really feel like is all that unrealistic. You might have to hedge a little bit and say, hey, the Saints might have to trade up that from 16 to make this first selection. But there's a way to do it. Or trade up from 19, keep 16, and make this first selection. But either way, being able to draft Charles Cross, which is how I was able to kick off this mock draft, was fantastic. And being able to come back from that at 19 and drafting Jameson Williams, even better. Jameson Williams, according to Albert Breer, is very likely, according to many sources around the NFL, believed that he's going to start off on the physically unable to perform list at the beginning of the 2022 season. What that means is that he would be unavailable for at least the first 6 games of the season. So he wouldn't be available until basically October. So with that being the case, when you draft Jameson Williams, you have to be okay with a late start to his rookie career. We talked a few episodes ago about the mantra, sign, Jarvis, draft, Jameson. That was one of the big reasons why we talked about that. You get Jarvis in the building, Jarvis Landry, in the building, and then you have a complimentary wide receiver to Michael Thomas until Jameson Williams is ready, and then Jameson Williams steps into that role. So I think that the Saints would be in a good position to draft Jameson Williams, not rush him out on the field if they can sign Jarvis Landry. Honestly, even without Jarvis Landry, they're in a good position to do that because of Michael Thomas. And it would be great to have Jameson Williams' field stretching ability, run after catch ability, all that sort of acumen that he has, to be able to have that for this sort of stretch run right into the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. So being able to get Charles Cross and Jameson Williams, the only thing I like more than that is getting Charles Cross and Chris Olave, because Chris Olave will be out there on the field for you week 1. Now at pick 49, I was able to get Jaquan Brisker, the safety out of Penn State. Jaquan Brisker, Jalen Petre, who would be the first Big 12 draft selection by the Saints since 2004 when they took Tavon Rooks late in the draft out of Kansas State. Either one of those guys gives you some versatility that can play a little bit of, multiple roles. Nick Cross out of Maryland as well, who we talked about in yesterday's episode. Both of those guys give you the opportunity to kind of look at Marcus May and say, okay, can you go back to the deep safety role and play that in this system? Or do we want to keep you in Robert Saleh's defensive role, which was having you in the box and then playing somebody at deep safety? Nick Cross would give you the versatility to be able to do either. Jaquan Brisker would also give you the versatility to be able to do either, though having Jaquan Brisker in the box underneath with his length and at his size would be amazing, especially with his instincts. At pick 98, I went with DeMarvin Leal, who is classified as an edge with PFF, but I still consider him to be an interior defensive lineman. He was used, Texas A&M, they used him all over the place and everything, which is kind of what you would do in New Orleans anyway, right? Like New Orleans uses their defensive line all over the place. They rotate them, all of that. But DeMarvin Leal, to me, would be a defensive tackle in the Saints system. He would be a really, really good sort of 3-tech pass rusher that can, be that penetrator, be that disruptor in the backfield. At 120, I went with UCLA tight end Greg Dulcich. A little bit more realistic selection here. These tight ends are going to drop. It's an interesting tight end class in the same way that it's an interesting running back class. There's not really a consensus number one top heavy list of selections or whatever, but it's still pretty deep. Like you can still get impact players at those positions rounds 3 through 6 more than likely. And to me, Greg Dulcich is right at the top of that list. You'll notice that I haven't addressed running back yet, but I'm about to. Rachaad White, the running back out of Arizona State. This was an easy one for me. For the same reason that I just talked about Greg Dulcich, like you might not be able to you might not want to reach in the first or second round for a running back or a tight end, but you can easily get impact players in rounds 3 through 6 at the running back position, just like at the tight end position. Rachaad White kind of does all the things that I just talked about with James Cook as well. And then finally at 194, this time I did go with Khalil Shakir, whose last name I'm not going to mess up this time, wide receiver out of Boise State. He's a little bit undersized, would probably be outside of the Saints prototype, but if the Saints are adjusting their prototype this year, then Khalil Shakir could potentially fit just like Chris Olave would fit, just like Jameson Williams would fit in that case. And Khalil Shakir be a little bit more of a sleeper selection. He's probably going to be more of like a 3rd or 4th rounder. But we've seen this before. Guys like Stanley Morgan Jr. and all these other guys that we kind of expected to be mid-round selections that went completely undrafted because of the value at wide receiver all throughout the draft and even into undrafted free agency. And so we see this over and over and over again every year, these wide receivers that we expect to be mid-round selections that don't even get drafted at all or that fall all the way down into day 3. And if teams are dumb enough to pass on Khalil Shakir for long enough for them to be available at 198 for the New Orleans Saints, there'd be no reason to pass him up. He'd slide right into the slot, be a short area quickness guy, free up Deontay Hardy to be able to use wherever. Remember, Deontay Hardy, no longer Deontay Harris. Be able to use him wherever you want to and also continue to have him focus on his special teams roles. Lots of different opportunities there. Velus Jones Jr. type, right? We talk about Velus Jones Jr. because of his connection through the University of Tennessee and Cody Burns. Khalil Shakir gives you a similar sort of a similar relationship in terms of what he could be in the slot. So that would be a fun one. I would love that draft. To be able to see them walk away with Charles Cross and Jameson Williams. It's pretty good stuff. All right, so coming up tomorrow, we're going to go over Mickey Loomis's press conference as well as other Saints pressers in terms of what they have to say about getting ready for the NFL draft. Then we're also going to take a look at one more mock draft, what we think the Saints will do, trying to predict what they're doing. And then on the second episode that'll come out tomorrow exclusively on YouTube, it'll premiere on YouTube. That one is going to be our pre-draft episode that'll premiere at 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. That one's going to be all about what I would do in the NFL draft, and we'll go round by round to get that done. I appreciate you as always for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL Draft. Getting started tomorrow, so you don't want to miss all the information that Ryan and Eric and their guests have for you. So head over to the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And as always, for everything else that you need in between these episodes and your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.